It happened in the blink of an eye. Security grabbed her by the arm, yanked her backpack off her shoulder, and dragged her across the marble lobby floor. People turned their heads. Whispers buzzed through the air like static. Who's that girl? Why is she even here? Did she sneak in? She tried to speak, to explain, but her voice was swallowed by the noise, by the suit-clad crowd now watching her, like she didn't belong. She was 23, barely 5 feet tall, drenched from the rain. Her jeans were faded, her shoes worn, her hoodie zipped to the top. She didn't look like the kind of person who belonged at a global tech summit, and that was exactly why they threw her out. The doorman shouted, "You're not on the list." She said, "Check again, my name is Ava King. I'm a speaker." He laughed in her face. The crowd chuckled. Phones came out. Someone muttered, "What kind of speaker dresses like that?" No one knew that in less than 30 minutes, that same girl would walk back into the room and make everyone watching feel absolutely ashamed of themselves. Not just because they misjudged her. Not just because she had every right to be there, but because she was the most important person in that entire building. Let me tell you what happened. 3 hours earlier, Ava stood in front of her bedroom mirror, hair in a ponytail. No makeup, just a soft hoodie and old jeans. Her closet was filled with dresses and tailored suits she had borrowed for previous talks, but today she wanted to come as herself. No brands, no armor, no disguises, just Ava. She slipped the invitation into her backpack. Official letterhead, gold trim. Printed signature from the event chair. It was real. She had been invited, personally, to deliver the closing keynote at the North American Tech Futures Conference, a global stage filled with venture capitalists, founders, and media giants. But the moment she walked through those glass doors, none of that mattered. She wasn't seen as a speaker. She was seen as a disruption, a misfit, an embarrassment. The woman at the check-in desk looked her up and down, smirked. "Are you lost, honey? The volunteer entrance is outside." Ava calmly handed over the invitation. The woman barely glanced at it. "Wait here." Then she disappeared. 10 minutes, then 20. People came and went. No one said a word. Her name was never called. Her badge was never printed. She stepped closer to ask again, but security was already on the move. The woman had reported a security risk. That was the term she used. A young woman in jeans, a hoodie, standing quietly with a folded piece of paper in her hand. And just like that, Ava was surrounded. Arms grabbed her. She was pushed backward through the crowd. Her backpack hit the floor with a slap. The invitation, torn in half. One piece in the trash. One piece under someone's heel. In those 30 seconds, everything she had worked for seemed to vanish. She had spent her whole life breaking out of the box. People tried to force her into. Grew up in foster care. Self-taught coding on library computers. Launched her first AI app at 19. Sold it 2 years later. Now she was the youngest woman ever invited to speak on that stage. And still, to them, she was no one. But here's the part you don't want to miss, because what she did next changed everything. And when the room realized who she really was, it was too late to take it back. If you're still here, I need you to hit like and comment the number 9. This story deserves to be heard, and you won't believe what happens next. She wasn't just there to speak. She was there to dismantle the very system that tried to erase her, and she was just getting started. Ava sat alone on the cold concrete steps outside the conference center, her backpack beside her, soaked from the rain. The crowd inside roared with applause. Someone else had just taken the stage. A speaker in a custom navy suit, slick hair, diamond watch. Inside, they were celebrating the future. Out here, the future was sitting in a puddle, trembling. She pulled her hood tighter over her head. Her fingers shook as she unlocked her phone, looking for any name, any number to call, but she stopped herself. No, she wasn't going to beg to be let back in. She wasn't going to call her advisor or her friend or that big-time VC who once told her she was the next big thing. because right now, it didn't matter who she knew. It mattered what they saw, and they didn't see her as a CEO, a coder, a creator. They saw a girl in wet jeans with chipped nail polish, and that's all it took to erase her. For a moment, Ava let herself feel it. The sting, the shame, the heat rising in her chest, the part of her that wanted to scream, to kick open the doors and demand justice. But she didn't. She took a deep breath, pulled out a small notebook from her bag, and started writing. Not a speech, not code, but everything she had just experienced, the looks, the words, the silence. She wrote it all down. Her hands moved fast, as if she were transcribing something sacred, something she wasn't going to let die in the rain. And then a soft voice. "Are you okay?" Ava looked up. A janitor stood near the corner of the steps, pushing a mop bucket across the walkway. She wore the same uniform Ava had seen dozens of staff members in, but there was kindness in her voice, and something else. Recognition. "You're Ava King, right?" the woman asked. Ava blinked. "How do you know me?" "I took your online Python class," she said with a smile. "Back in 2020, you helped me build my first website." Ava stared, stunned. The woman smiled wider and knelt beside her. "You're not supposed to be out here," she whispered. "Come with me." Moments later, Ava was slipping through the back corridors of the conference hall, utility doors, supply closets, staff-only stairwells. The woman led her with quiet precision, like a guide through a hidden world. Inside, the main ballroom buzzed. Bright lights, music, champagne. People in luxury suits toasted the future of innovation, while the actual innovator stood in the dark behind a curtain. Ava peeked through a side slit. There she was, the woman who had torn her invitation, standing center stage, welcoming a panel of speakers, laughing, smiling, acting as though nothing had happened, and worse. Ava saw her own name on the screen behind her. Closing keynote, Ava King, 4:30 p.m. It hadn't been canceled, they hadn't removed her. They were going to steal her talk. They'd found someone else to deliver it. The title, the topics, even the slide deck, it was all hers, slightly modified, slightly polished, but unmistakably hers. Ava's heart pounded, and then she saw him. Standing off to the side, chatting with two board members, was Thomas Vail, the founder of Vail Capital, and one of the most influential men in the startup world. He was the man who had passed on investing in Ava's app 2 years ago, called it too ambitious. But now, there he was, smiling at a stolen version of her idea, about to help raise funding for the same product under a new name. Her idea, her code, her voice, taken, polished, and handed to someone who looked the part. Ava's grip tightened around her notebook. She could feel the rage rising, but it wasn't wild or chaotic. It was focused, cold, sharp. They didn't just disrespect her, they tried to erase her, but they made one critical mistake. They didn't realize she was still inside, and she was done waiting. What Ava did next would flip the entire room upside down and force every single person who laughed at her to watch as the truth unfolded live. Stick around. Ava crouched in the shadows of the back corridor, heart pounding in her chest. The ballroom was just 20 feet away, separated only by a black velvet curtain. From her angle she could see it all, the chandelier lights glowing like 100 miniature suns, the buzz of polished voices, and the stage that should have been hers. And then she saw her. The woman now standing behind the podium, smiling wide, microphone clipped to her collar, voice echoing with confidence, was reading Ava's words. Same speech title, same core idea, same cadence, except it wasn't hers anymore. It was sanitized, trimmed, and rebranded under a new name. A more presentable name, the kind of name people wrote checks for, the kind of name that wore Louboutins and walked like she'd always belonged. Ava's jaw clenched, her fists curled into the pages of her notebook. She wasn't just erased, she was replaced. Ava pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. She started recording, whispering into the mic. They stole my keynote, word for word. Same talking points, same demo. This is intellectual theft. Her name is Michelle Blaine. She's reciting the script I spent 6 months writing. She paused, and I'm going to take it all back. She sent the voice note to her cloud drive. Then she pulled up the file she kept buried at the bottom of her phone, a folder named Failsafe. Inside were 3 recordings, 1 spreadsheet, and a set of legal documents she never thought she'd need. Until now, she had saved everything. Every email, every draft, every timestamp from the day she first submitted her proposal to the conference committee. She had proof. Ava scanned the ballroom until she spotted the event organizer, Carla Devine, standing off to the side, smiling and chatting with a familiar face. That face stopped Ava cold. Harrison Vail, founder of Vail Capital, multi-billionaire, gatekeeper of Silicon Valley. He was talking to Carla in low, animated tones, holding a USB drive in his left hand. Carla glanced around, then took the drive and slipped it into her clutch. And just like that, Ava knew. This wasn't a last-minute speaker switch. This was a coordinated theft. Her keynote hadn't been reassigned because of a schedule mix-up. It had been lifted, intentionally, to showcase her ideas under a marketable face. Someone who fit the room better. Someone who could stand beside Vail Capital and smile for the cameras. They were trying to bury her. Ava's fingers trembled as she hit record on her camera. She zoomed in on Carla and Harrison, captured the handoff. The hush, the quiet urgency in their eyes. Then she panned to the stage, Michelle Blaine, delivering Ava's story as if it were her own. And in that moment, something inside Ava snapped into place. Not rage, not panic, but clarity. They stole her seat, so she would build her own stage. She stood up, pulled the hood from her head, looked around for a way out, and that's when she heard it. Miss King, a soft voice behind her. She turned. It was the janitor from earlier, the one who had helped her slip back inside. She held out a lanyard, a badge. Bank, it's time you go back in the front door. Ava took it, her mind already calculating. She didn't need revenge. She needed exposure. And she had a plan. She would confront them. Yes, but not in private, not with a lawyer, not through email. She would do it where it would hurt the most, in front of the cameras, the investors, the entire industry. Because if they wanted to erase her in public, then she was going to rise in public. And she wasn't going to whisper anymore. The countdown had begun. Part 4 is where Ava storms the system. And the room will never recover. The microphone hissed with feedback as Michelle Blaine smiled wide, her voice polished and smooth. What we must ask ourselves is this, she said, pacing the stage like a seasoned pro. Are we building technology that includes everyone, or just the few? Ava stood in the wings, just behind the curtain, watching her own words echo from someone else's mouth. The irony hit like a punch to the chest. Michelle gestured toward the screen behind her. A slide appeared, a mock-up of a mobile app using predictive behavioral AI. It was clean, slick, sophisticated. It was also Ava's prototype, frame by frame, line by line, stolen. Ava took one deep breath and stepped forward. The janitor gave her a silent nod, holding the curtain open just wide enough. The lights hit her face instantly. The spotlight wasn't kind. Her hoodie was still damp. Her jeans were creased, but her eyes, sharp, calm, lit with something fire couldn't burn through. No one saw her coming until she was halfway across the stage. Michelle paused, blinking, confused. The crowd murmured. Cameras turned. Security stiffened, and then Ava took the second mic. Sorry to interrupt, she said evenly, but I believe you're presenting my work. Michelle's smile faltered. I'm sorry. Ava turned to the audience, her voice steady, clear. My name is Ava King. I was scheduled as the closing keynote speaker for this conference. 3 hours ago, I was thrown out of this building because of how I looked. Not because I lacked credentials. Not because I lacked talent. but because I didn't look like someone you expected to see on this stage. Silence. Absolute. You're currently watching a presentation built off my original submission, word for word, slide for slide, delivered by someone who has never written a single line of the code behind it. Gasps rippled across the room. A man in the front row lowered his phone, stunned. A woman whispered something to her colleague. One camera zoomed in, then another. I have full documentation, Ava continued. Emails, drafts, metadata, timestamps. I also have a video recording of a private conversation between this event's organizer and a certain venture capitalist you all know. A conversation about suppressing my presence on this stage and replacing me with someone more visually appropriate for branding. All heads turned toward the side of the ballroom, where Carla Devine now sat frozen in her seat. Ava pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. The ballroom screen behind her flickered. Then it changed. Audio played. Carla's voice crackled over the speakers. If she shows up, security pulls her out. We can't afford another viral mess. Michelle looks better on stage. Same content. Cleaner delivery. Investors won't care. People gasped again, louder this time. Carla stood up in a panic. Turn it off. That's a private, but it was too late. The damage had detonated. Ava turned back to the audience, her voice rising, not in anger, but strength. I've spent my life in rooms where I wasn't supposed to speak. I've watched people like me get shut out, shut down, and rebranded under someone else's name. But today, I'm not leaving quietly. She paused, scanning the room, locking eyes with faces that no longer looked amused or indifferent, but ashamed. If we're serious about building an inclusive future, it starts with who we let stand on this stage. It starts with who we choose to listen to. The crowd was still, frozen, and then a slow clap. One man in the second row stood and applauded, then another. Then a woman near the media pit, and within seconds, the entire ballroom was on its feet. Michelle Blaine had stepped back, her face blank, exposed, spotlighted. Ava stood alone at center stage, microphone in hand, her voice ringing through the applause. She didn't need to say another word. The room said it for her. And if you think that was the end of it, think again. Because in part 5, the fallout begins, and Ava's about to reveal something even bigger than stolen code. The applause still echoed when Ava stepped back from the mic. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly, casting the whole room in a hush of uncertainty. Ava could feel the shift, the power in the room. It was no longer in the hands of the board members or the brand name speakers or the billionaire investors sitting in the front row. It was hers now, but she wasn't done. Far from it. Security guards stood frozen by the exits, unsure of what to do. Carla Devine, the event director, was on the phone, her voice sharp and panicked, whispering fast into the receiver. Michelle Blaine stood stiff beside the podium, her face white as printer paper, her hands trembling as she unclipped her mic. And Harrison Vale, the man who orchestrated it all, remained seated, arms crossed, eyes locked on Ava like a man who knew something was slipping away. Ava turned and addressed him directly. "Mr. Vale," she said calmly. "I believe you were planning to announce a new round of funding today, yes? A $10 million seed round for a product built on stolen code, using a pitch you lifted from my original submission." Vale didn't answer. The room did. A collective gasp, then a murmur, then silence. Ava tapped her phone again. Another audio file played, this time Vale's voice. "She's too raw," he had said in the recording. "She doesn't have the polish. We need someone who looks like they belong in front of cameras. She can sit this one out." The audience shifted, uncomfortable, angry. Investors who had once smiled at Vale now exchanged side glances. Ava let the moment sit, then she continued. "But that's not even the worst part," she said. "You see, while you were busy replacing me, while you were mocking my appearance and calling me unmarketable, something else was happening behind the scenes." She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim envelope, opening it slowly. "The board of this conference has been quietly restructuring. I've spent the past 6 months acquiring silent shares through a nonprofit incubator, a fund I built to support underrepresented founders. She paused. And 3 weeks ago, I became the majority shareholder. Gasps again, this time louder. People stood, some clapped, others just stared. Ava raised her eyes and scanned the room, which means that as of this moment, I have the authority to request resignations from any board member or organizer who has violated the code of ethics we agreed to when this conference was founded. Carla Devine stood, her lips parted. "You're bluffing," she snapped. Ava nodded to a woman near the stage. A quiet, sharp-looking attorney stepped forward and handed Ava a signed resolution. Effective immediately, Ava read, "Carla Devine is dismissed from her role as Director of Programming. Michelle Blaine's participation is rescinded, and Vail Capital is formally banned from future involvement with this event or its related ventures." Chaos erupted. Reporters in the back scrambled to take notes. Phones lifted into the air. One of the investors, a silver-haired man in his 60s, stood and began clapping slowly. The rest followed. Michelle Blaine bolted off stage. Carla's face twisted, then collapsed. Harrison Vail didn't move, but his empire had just begun to crack. Ava stood still in the center of it all, her voice the only steady thing in the room. "This wasn't just about me," she said. "This was about what happens every day in our industry, in our schools, in our hiring rooms, in our boardrooms. People get erased because they don't look the part, because they don't dress the part, because they don't have the connections, or the right accent, or the right skin, or the right story." She looked out across the crowd, now silent, attentive, listening not with politeness but with urgency. "But if we don't disrupt that pattern, then what's the point of innovation?" The silence was electric. No one moved. Ava lowered the mic and turned to walk off stage. But before she disappeared behind the curtain, she paused. She looked back and smiled. Her story had just been rewritten, not by them but by her. And the world was finally watching. The conference room didn't feel like the same place anymore. What had once been a glittering monument to gatekeeping and curated perfection was now quiet, shaken. A few guests left their seats, stunned. Others stood frozen, unsure whether to applaud or retreat. The sound of heels against marble faded as Michelle Blaine disappeared into the back hallway, escorted by 2 conference volunteers. Ava stood backstage now, no longer as an outsider sneaking in through side doors but as the rightful owner of the space. She was no longer reacting. She was rebuilding. Minutes later, Ava returned to the stage, not to defend herself, not to drop another bomb, but to speak. And this time the mic was hers by right. "Let's talk about repair," she began. "Let's talk about what happens after the walls come down." The ballroom had reassembled itself, not physically, but emotionally. The audience leaned forward. Their faces were softer now, less skeptical, more curious. A few even looked embarrassed, and rightly so. Ava continued. "This isn't about destroying people's careers. This is about restoring integrity to a space that forgot why it existed in the first place." She turned to face the press row. "I've already submitted formal documentation to the ethics committee. There will be a third-party audit of all funding announcements made at this event. If a single pitch was accepted based on stolen work, it's getting pulled." Scattered applause broke out, real, earnest. She nodded toward a small table near the front, where a few staff members sat stunned, still wearing conference polos. "I also want to acknowledge the people who make these events actually run, the janitorial staff, the Avis Bay techs, the caterers, the ones who don't get press passes or thank you gifts." She gestured toward the back of the room, and especially to Rosa, the woman who helped me get back inside when no one else would. Rosa, the janitor who had recognized Ava's name hours earlier, stepped forward from behind a curtain. She looked overwhelmed, hand covering her mouth. "Rosa," Ava said with a smile, "I'm starting a new fellowship program for women in tech. I'd be honored if you'd accept the first full scholarship. Tuition, mentorship, relocation, whatever you need. The audience erupted. Rosa's eyes welled with tears as the room stood to applaud, this time not for shock, not for scandal, but for something real, something healing. But Ava wasn't finished. She took a moment, then spoke again. There's something deeply wrong when we call ourselves innovators, but keep using the same filters to decide who's worth listening to. I was told I didn't look like the future. Well, she stepped aside and motioned to the large screens behind her. Dozens of faces appeared, a live stream of young coders, engineers and founders, watching from schools, shelters, community centers across the country. Many wore hoodies, some wore hijabs, some sat in wheelchairs, all of them watching, wide-eyed, hopeful. This, Ava said, is the future. The crowd was on its feet again, but this time Ava didn't wait for applause. She turned to the screen and waved. To everyone watching, you are not invisible, you are not too messy, too young, too weird, too poor, too loud, too quiet, too anything. You belong in this space. We're building a new room, and there's a seat waiting for you. The cameras caught every moment. But Ava didn't speak for the cameras. She spoke for the version of herself who sat in the rain that morning, who was told no, and still walked forward. Who was dragged across marble floors and still found her footing. Who wasn't supposed to make it to the stage, and now owned the building. Justice didn't come from vengeance, it came from truth. And now it was time to use it, not to burn bridges, but to light new paths. The conference ended, but the ripple didn't. Clips of Ava's speech flooded the internet. Within hours, #she belongs here was trending worldwide. TikToks, stitches, think pieces. Not just about the drama, but about the message. In a world obsessed with packaging, perfection, and who fits the part, Ava had stood up in a wrinkled hoodie and rewrote the rules in real time. But the internet moved fast. Ava didn't. She didn't sit for interviews, didn't launch a new product, didn't cash in. Instead, she went home. A week after the conference, Ava sat in her tiny kitchen, toast burning in the toaster, laptop open beside her. The notifications hadn't stopped. Offers, speaking gigs, brand deals. She ignored them. Instead, she clicked open a livestream window. On the screen, a classroom full of teenage girls in Nairobi. Behind them, a banner that read "Code Without Borders, live with Ava King." Ava smiled, adjusted her mic, and began teaching. No studio, no makeup, no script, just her. Later that month, she stood in front of a boardroom of new scholarship recipients, 25 young women, first-generation coders, mothers, immigrants, foster kids, dreamers. Some wore suits, some wore sneakers, all of them belonged. Ava didn't give a speech that day. She just listened, took notes, asked what they needed, what systems still needed breaking, what doors still needed opening. Because that's the thing about justice, it doesn't end with one victory, it starts there. Meanwhile, the investigation into the stolen presentation made headlines. Michelle Blaine quietly disappeared from the startup scene. Carla Devine issued a public apology and resigned from multiple boards. Harrison Vale's firm lost 3 major partners and a quarter of its funding within 6 weeks. But Ava didn't gloat. She rebuilt. She founded The Core, a mentorship and investment initiative that backed founders from underestimated backgrounds. No dress codes, no photo filters, no polished pitches required. Just substance, just soul, just truth. 6 months later, at the very same conference, now under new leadership, Ava was asked to return. This time not just to speak, but to open the entire event. She walked on stage in the same hoodie she'd worn that day. Still faded, still hers. No applause at first, just silence. The good kind, the kind that means they're listening. She looked out over the sea of faces, young and old, suits and sweats, dreamers and doubters, and smiled. "This isn't about me," she said. "It's about everyone who's ever been told, you don't look like you belong here." And proving that belonging isn't about how you look, it's about what you bring. The applause was thunderous, but Ava didn't stand in it. She stepped aside and motioned to the next speaker. a 17-year-old coder from Detroit, nervous but radiant, stepping into her moment. Because that's what leaders do. They don't make the stage about themselves. They build it wide enough for everyone else to rise. And just like that, Ava King didn't just walk off stage. She passed the mic. The revolution didn't come with fire. It came with a calm voice, a shaking hand, and a woman who refused to stay silent in a world that tried to erase her. And now the world was listening.